Returning to our story, Dateline's investigation has turned up disturbing practices by a company State Farm used for years to review and justify denying or reducing medical claims. But was the nation's largest insurance carrier just deceived by one small company? You're about to meet a former insider who says it went much further than that. Once again, John Larson.
In 1992, Cindy Robinson of Boise, Idaho, was driving on a highway when suddenly her entire back wheel fell off. Her axle hit the pavement hard.
It was like thunk, 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 thunk down the road.
So you're getting bounced around pretty good.
Right.
Cindy was hurt, eventually requiring surgery for a herniated disc in her back. Her insurance company was State Farm. Now, what you're about to hear may sound familiar, because just like in Lucretia Duffy's case, State Farm got a paper review that called Cindy's injuries minor, blaming her medical problems on something else, work-related activities. And State Farm refused to pay most of her medical bills.
In the common slang, they're basically saying to you, we don't believe you.
Right.
We think you're lying to us.
Right.
But this time, State Farm used a different paper review company. It sent Cindy's file from Boise, Idaho to Bethesda, Maryland, to a company called Medical Claims Review Services, or MCRS.
Ron.
So we tracked down the company's founder and former medical director, Dr. Ronald Gotts. Right away, we learned that just like at CMR, doctors didn't write many of the reports it sent to State Farm and other insurance companies. In fact, they often didn't even sign them. Other people in the office did that for them.
I mean, it was our report, but someone else did the calligraphy.
But Dr. Gotts assured us, just like the president of CMR had, that doctors always read and checked them all.
The doctor looked at every one.
You read all the reports?
That's right.
But listen to what happened next, when we told him a former MCRS doctor had told us just the opposite.
He said it was standard practice at MCRS for reports to go out without a doctor ever looking at them.
It was not standard practice.
You're actually saying it never happened.
It was certainly not standard practice. It may, I can't say that it, excuse me, never happened, but it was certainly not standard practice.
We kept asking, and Dr. Gotts eventually admitted that 10 to 15% of MCRS's reports, hundreds, were never looked at by doctors at all.
I mean, there were some small percent of our cases that probably went out. That would be my best guess, and it's a guess at this point, that went out under our medical director's signature that had been reviewed by the nurse.
If that's the case, then why didn't the nurses just sign them?
Well, because these represented the view of the corporate medical director. Because the nurses...
Doctor, with all due respect, how do you know it represented your view if you never even looked at it?
Because the nurses were very well trained. They were very well supervised. It was only on the very simple, straightforward issues that the nurses would carry out those reviews.
But no matter how well trained the nurses were, they were not doctors. And their reviews were being used by State Farm as doctors' opinions to challenge, even overrule the opinions of accident victims' doctors. And they saved State Farm money. And here's another thing. Paper reviews are supposed to offer independent, objective medical advice. So it stands to reason the reviews wouldn't always favor the insurance company. Surely they sometimes favored the accident victims. Yet Dateline obtained copies of 79 MCRS reports done for State Farm. Although too small a number to draw any definitive conclusions, we were surprised to find every single medical review, 79 out of 79, favored State Farm, recommended cutting back or denying care to accident victims. Dr. Gotts told us that's because State Farm only sent him problematic cases. But we asked State Farm's Jack North.
What does that suggest to you when this independent medical review company sends back 79 cases and all 79 recommend cutting medical reimbursement? That seems strange.
Looking back, if we had been able to look broader at the time, we may have seen that trend earlier. And it is not a trend that I'm happy about or supportive of.
And that might sound reasonable. After all, State Farm is a huge company. handling about 33,000 accident claims every day in nearly 1,000 centers around the country. But we found someone near Los Angeles who told us, from where she sat, the pattern of negative reviews was hard to miss.
What was your job at State Farm?
As a claim representative.
Shelby Patterson handled auto insurance claims for State Farm for 3 years. She says in her office it was common knowledge paper review companies cut medical care.
Would you have been surprised if any of the paper reviews came back and said, we recommend paying everything?
Oh, I would have been shocked. And deep down inside, I never thought it was independent.
So if this wasn't an effort to get an independent medical opinion, what was it?
It was a real fast way to close a file.
In other words, cut off medical payments and hope the accident victim gives up. But Patterson was only one worker exposed to a small part of State Farm's operations. So we really didn't know if all this went any higher. Until we met this man.
It's a company-wide program, and it is decisively and deliberately orchestrated.
Jim Mathis is a former State Farm superintendent who had one of the bigger jobs at State Farm in Washington State. He told us State Farm management not only knew there was a pattern of negative opinions, but wanted it that way.
There is only one motivation for using a paper review, and that's to increase profits by reducing costs.
In fact, Dateline found these internal State Farm memos from the early 90s showing that at least one part of State Farm kept track of how much it was saving using paper reviews. One State Farm supervisor even referred to paper reviews as medical cost reduction services. And Mathis says State Farm favored paper review companies that consistently recommended the deepest cuts.
So it was dollars and cents.
Yes.
It wasn't whether or not they're honest, they're doing good work, it's how much money they were saving you.
That's correct.
Could this really be true? Take a look at this, a page from a State Farm manual sent to hundreds of employees. It says if adjusters want to deny a claim, they should hire a paper review company who will support your position. Remember, State Farm says all it wants are independent, objective medical opinions. So you may be as surprised as we were when Bill Marvin, whose company provided some of those opinions, told us he thought it was his job to save State Farm money.
We were set up as we advertised ourselves as a cost containment company.
We knew that it was a tool to reduce costs, and if we all of the management wanted to promote or move forward in our careers, we would use these tools.
Mathis says he resisted using paper reviews, especially CMRs, because he didn't think they were fair. He says he shared his concerns with his supervisors, concerns which should have gone up the ladder to this man, Deputy Regional Vice President Ralph Householder, a top official at State Farm. Mathis says he hoped the well-respected State Farm veteran would set things right, but instead, rather than doing less business with CMR, Mathis says Householder pushed employees to do more business with CMR.
You got in trouble because you were trying to be a good neighbor.
I believe so.
And where did it get you?
Well, I was terminated from State Farm. Yes.
Are you smiling because it's funny or because it's sad?
Because it's the only emotion I have left over the issue.
Mathis says he was fired because he wouldn't go along, and in 1997 filed suit against State Farm, accusing it of conspiring with CMR to defraud its policyholders. State Farm disputes the charges and says Mathis was fired for misconduct and abuse of his position. A judge dismissed Mathis's suit, and he is appealing. But you may be interested in what happened to Mathis's superior, Ralph Householder. Well, he got a new job, Senior Vice President of CMR, a position Dateline has learned he negotiated 4 months before State Farm says he left his job. We asked Householder to explain, but he declined. And if that sounds like an inappropriate relationship between companies that were supposed to be independent, it was even more surprising when we learned what some people inside State Farm were doing.